Well, what's up everyone? My name's Tom. This is Besser Builds, and today I'm going to show you how I mill lumber. It's boring, but it's an important step. And also, I do it with no joiner. Okay, so if cost or space is your issue and you want to know how to mill perfect lumber, then this is the video for you. So let's get into it. All right, so today we're going to take this piece of rough sawn cherry. You can see it's kind of cupped, and we're going to mill this up nice and square. And step one to the milling process starts before you get in your shop. All right, you want to really pay attention to the lumber that you're buying. Okay, you're going to have cups, you're going to have bows in the board. That's pretty normal. The biggest thing you want to avoid is a twist. You can get a twist out, but you're going to really have a very thin piece when you're done. So that's the first thing, is I try and select my lumber to be as straight as possible just out of the get-go. I know that some people don't have that option. My sawmill's great. I can go and pick out piece by piece. I know other people, they order X number of board feet, they just get X number of board feet. So if you can pick out your lumber, that's step one. And honestly, it's going to make everything else so much easier. Now, if you do have a bad piece and you're making short sections, not as big a deal. You can usually, throughout the piece, get straight enough pieces to go on from there. All right, normally at this point, everyone else is going to tell you, hey, let's go to the joiner. Listen, I don't have one. It's not that I don't want one. I'm not anti-joiner. I'm not saying sell yours or anything like that. It's just that it's a tool that's a luxury that I don't have space in my shop for. Like, listen, I did 6 figures last year. It's like, bottom line, like, it's not a cost thing for me. It's just that I don't want to clutter up my space because it's going to really kill my workflow. So I have a lot of workarounds for that. And honestly, I think that's one of the last big tools you should buy. And I will buy one eventually when I move into a bigger space, and I'll probably wonder how I ever did it without it. But until then, we're going to start our process off a little bit differently. So we're going to go over to the planer. All right, so without a joiner, you need to get one perfectly flat face, okay? Now, generally speaking at the planer, especially with longer goods, I've noticed that I can skip plane things and get it really close probably 90% of the time. And if you're being really honest with yourself, unless you're doing like something really specific, some really specific joinery, close enough's usually good enough. But if you need it to be perfect, then comes the planer sled. And I just build these. Basically, it's a piece of plywood. Because this one's long, I reinforce the edge here, and then the planer head's spinning this way. So you want to stop right here to keep it from ripping the board off the sled. If it's going to kick back, there's nothing you can do to stop it anyways. This purple stuff right here, some 80 grit sandpaper, I just glued that on there because it's going to help it to kind of grip on there and not move as much. So the way the planer sled works is the whole board goes through there all at the same time, and I'll show you that in a second. But you may need to shim your board, so I don't know if the camera is going to pick it up. But this board's got a little bit of a cup to it. Okay, now I don't know if this is true or not, but I've always heard that the planer has enough force to push the cup down and keep it from actually smoothing it, like it would bounce back. I've never had that issue, so usually the easiest way, just put a cup side down, and then if you have to shim it, you can go ahead and shim it. So let's go ahead and run this, get one flat side. All right, so one thing you want to think about when you're doing this, if you do not have a fancy planer bench set up like I do, which I did a whole video on, so you should go watch that after you're done with this one, and you should also hit the subscribe button for me. You may want to cut these in the smallest possible pieces before you actually plane them. If you're trying to balance things, you can really reduce snipe by going smaller first. Because I built this bench, it's way easier, way more time efficient for me just to do one big piece all at once and then cut it down from there. So the other note that you want to kind of keep in mind is you can't stop and go to bed here. Okay, you remove material from one side, you have to also remove material from the other side. Otherwise, this is going to take in a ton of moisture, so it's going to expand, and then tomorrow morning you're going to have a potato chip. So now you just get rid of the sled, you run it the other way. So let's get her done. Whoops. right, smart guy, you're thinking, now you got two flat sides, but you got two bad edges and you don't have a joiner. How are you gonna take care of that? Well, there's a lot of ways to skin that cat, which that saying is about catfish, by the way, not about your neighbor's cat. You know, don't be a psycho. But yeah, there's a lot of ways to tackle that. So I typically use a track saw, but I'm gonna show you several different ways to do that. And another note here is that it's important to do this step first when you don't have a joiner, because you need a 90-degree angle. And if you try to put a track or your table saw on this rough, you're not going to get 90 degrees. So you need your two parallel sides first, unlike with a joiner where you do, you know, your first 90. So now we need to go ahead and rip a nice straight line at 90 degrees. Okay. So the first and the easiest way to do this is just to do it at the table saw. But there's something important you need to know. If you have a piece that is smaller than the distance from your blade to your fence, you can actually pull this off with no jigs, no nothing. And in the case of my saw, that's anything under 17 inches, okay? Anything under 17 inches, I can just push right through here, flip it over, hit the other side. Now, I've seen people use like levels and stuff like that to extend it. That's kind of dumb. What I used to do before I got this saw and I used a job site saw was I built a piece that fit over this to extend my fence. And that was just useful in general, but also, so if I did that, I can get myself, say, out to like an extra 24 inches is probably pretty reasonable. Yeah, I'd say 24 inches would be reasonable that you can joint on this. The reason why you can't go past the fence is that if you have a bow in the board as it moves over this fence, it's going to put a bind in your blade. Best case scenario, you end up with a crooked cut. Worst case scenario, you get a really bad kickback. So keep that in mind. Shorter than the distance from the end of the fence to the beginning of the blade. You can build a jig to extend the fence. The other thing you can do is you can build a different type of jig, and I'll show you that right now. All right, so this jig right here is something that I typically only use for cutting tapers. Sometimes I'll use it to joint, you know, just depends on my mood. Sorry if that was loud. But basically it is a 12-inch wide board, and I have some T-tracks in it, and I have these hold downs. You can use all sorts of different types of hold downs, but essentially what you're doing is you're creating this straight edge is what you're going to reference off the fence. So you can do a board probably a little bit longer than this. I think this one might actually work. That might be how we finally join it. But it's definitely like a process to do so. I find this to be a little bit slower than the track saw, but that's just me. All right, my preferred method for joining boards is my DeWalt 60-volt track saw. I know that this thing's not fancy, it's not pretty, but it is powerful as hell. This thing's the workhorse for my shop. I ran this bitch through 8-quarter lumber with no problems. So this is my preferred way to do it. I have several length of tracks, but the most crucial one is this big, long 102-inch track. Honestly, even if I had a joiner, I'd probably still use this on long boards. I don't know why I'm yelling. My microphone's right here. Sorry. I would probably still use this for all of my long boards for joining, just because that can be an issue on a joiner. And you might be thinking, well, a track saw is expensive and I don't have a track saw, Tom. Well, I can get around that. So, you don't have a track saw. You don't want to spend a bunch of money on a track saw or buy a long track like that, which was expensive as shit. I'll just be completely honest with you. So, here's a little pro tip. Get you a circ saw. They're cheap. You don't need a cordless one. You can get a corded one. That would be perfectly fine for this. And then you're going to make your own track, and it's super simple. This is a short one because I don't need a track, but you're basically limited to about 8 feet, the length of a sheet of plywood. So all I did is I ripped down a piece. It's important that this is straight. Doesn't really matter how it orients on this board, because I'll show you what we're going to do. We are going to clamp this down this way. Let's do this way. No, that's dumb. Let's do this way. That's dumb because the piece would fall off. I don't really want the piece to fall off. Although, if I get hurt on camera, you would subscribe, right? Would that be worth it? Because, I mean, I might. You never know. I'm just kidding. Safety third. So, basically we do that. Your first pass is very important, and you're going to want to make sure that you keep your fence against the side of your saw against the fence at all times. So, here we go. Okay, you might have noticed that was dusty. That's the big downside to not having a track saw, because they typically have dust collection on them. So this is what you're left with, is this nice little fence here. Now in this particular case, I have a left-handed track saw, because when I do framing, because framing as in getting in the frame, I was a carpenter and I've done a lot of framing, and I prefer a left-handed saw. If it was the other way around, your base would be much larger, which would actually probably be better for this. But essentially, you clamp this down to whatever workpiece it is that you need to cut. And this line right here is the kerf, so you know exactly where it's going to be. Might help with tear out, might not. Cheap, easy fix. You probably have the scrap wood in your shop already. Boom, you have a track saw. Boom, you're jointing boards. So I'm going to actually joint this board. Let's do the sled on the table saw method. Why not? So you're going to see here why I call this method tedious. But I happen to know that the sled is 12 inches wide, so I just want my board to slightly overhang the face here. Okay. If I had to join a ton of boards, I would never ever do it this way. Make sure your clamps aren't going to bust the fence into the fence. And there we go. All right, let me get this set up to cut. All right, so there you have it. We now have two parallel sides with one side that's 90 degrees. Can you guess what we're gonna do with this side? That's right, we're gonna put it on the table saw and we're gonna get all four sides done. All right, so you have it. We now have what we would call S4S lumber. Surface four sides. Look at this beautiful piece of cherry. I wish cherry was still in style. I love it. A couple of other quick tips before I end this. When you buy your lumber, it's usually a good idea to let it acclimate in your shop for like a day or two. I'll be completely honest with you, I'm guilty of not doing that. But if you're gonna mill it and you're not gonna use it the same day, sticker it overnight. Another thing that I'll do is just as I'm pulling it out of the trailer, I'll just kind of skip plane it real quick just to knock some of the stuff off, and then I'll finish milling it the next day. I'll sticker in between then too. Stickers, putting a lot of little boards between each layer. And that just helps with air movement to keep things from moving too much. It's more moisture than it is temperature oriented. But I mean, that's it. It's a really boring part of the job. But in my case, it's the most important part of the job. I know it depends on the part of your country you're in and things like that, whether it's better to buy S4S or to buy rough sawn and mill it. I prefer rough saw and milling it because I have control of the board. If you buy S4S and it cups and bows, you're screwed. Also, I live in Northeast Ohio. I'm technically in Appalachia. There's a lot of great sawmills and stuff like that around here where I can get this stuff pretty cheap. So if I compare the price of S4S lumber to rough sawn lumber and the time it takes me to mill it, it's a no-brainer. I just pass that difference on to the customer. Now I'm getting paid to mill it, and it makes financial sense. If you're doing this for a business, that's up to you to figure out with your own numbers, because everything is, you know, subjective one way or the other. If you have any questions at all, please leave them down in the comment section. Like and subscribe. That would really help me out big time. I can't believe how like supportive everyone is in the comments. I really was expecting some hate, and I spent my whole life in a locker room, a steel mill, or a job site. So like, I'm a shit talking professional, and y'all are letting me down. You're letting me down. But yeah, basically that's all there is to it. If you want to see another type of video, let me know in the comments as well. And then see you next time.